Let's get back to war, shall we? I guess I come from a family of troublemakers. The first letter is actually Sunday, October 24th, Fort Fannin, Texas. And my grandpa has gotten in trouble. So, well, him and some other boys did. And the reason for my personal gig was the fact that I too had dropped my rifle, or at least mine was on the ground, even though I hadn't actually dropped it myself. But one doesn't argue such technicalities in the Army. He just takes it, and he's on the now comes collective blacklist for future detail. Army word for nasty jobs. From that, time forward and ever forevermore, etc. From that last phrase, you can see I went to church this morning, and believe it or not, I did. One of the boys who had helped me with my housekeeping detail wanted someone to go with him, and I felt I owed him that much for his trouble on my behalf before breakfast this morning. Church here is not much different than in civilian life, except for the additional inconsistency that the chaplain wears a military uniform and a captain's bars under which he pins the cross of Christ. Crossed rifles, which are the insignia of the infantry to which our chaplain is attached, just don't seem to harmonize well to my way of thinking with the cross of Christ, which he wears and preaches. However, I'll get back now to my training. None of them know for certain. In fact, nothing in the Army is certain, as ironclad orders are of one day countermanded to the next. But the latest dope from our CO, commanding officer, is that we have just completed our first week of a 17-week basic training course that we are attached to but not necessarily a part of the infantry. That those who successfully complete, I would say survive, the basic training course do become a part of the infantry unless transferred for specialized training to some other unit. Of course, even if I were one of those successful candidates, to be permitted to wear the exalted insignia of the crossed rifles, and you don't refer to a rifle as a gun, or you're severely reprimanded, if not gigged. I think that's put in the brig. Doesn't necessarily mean that I would continue as an infantryman in a combat sense, but might be placed in signal corps, medics, quartermaster, finance department, etc. Units of all which go to make up an infantry division. Now, and don't let this scare you, our CO says that all who would complete the 17-week cycle may regard themselves as fully prepared, equipped, and eligible for active service in combat areas, which in plain English means that if you can and do take it for 17 weeks here, you may find yourself in a foreign soil very early in 1944. When I say don't let that scare you, I'm not trying to gloss over the facts. I merely mean that I'll be much surprised if I can take it for 17 weeks at the pace set in the week just closed. From our company of 200 men, an average of 8 each day are on sick call, and you don't get out that just for blistered feet, sore throats, headaches, etc. For our barracks, 50 men are confined to barracks for physical reasons, and 2 are hospitalized right now after only 1 week of pre-cycle or supposedly soft stuff. The entire the entire camp is said to contain some 30 to 35 men, and physical discharges are said to number well over 100 per day. These figures are merely rumor. That's all you get here, never official facts and figures, but they're the best gauge I have just now on my own choices in the immediate future. Another rumor here is that very few men over 25 ever develop into satisfactory combat men, which would seem to indicate that I was born 11 years too soon, I hope. So far as that subject matter in our training is concerned, it is not wise for us to say too much, but it appears to be deadly serious and not of the dress parade or Boy Scout variety. About 50% or more of and more of our time is spent in the rifle is called calisthenics, and they're not the school variety either, in close order drill, some double timing, and in actual ground coverage, which increases daily. We've had instruction in bivouacking, which includes all phases of living in the open, such as tent pitching, latrine digging, camp sanitation of various kinds, water purification, etc. Most of our field time is spent full field pack, including rifle, canteen, tactical articles, blanket, some extra clothing, bayonet, and trenching tools, first aid kit, etc. And it all fits in a neat backpack which you climb into like a straitjacket, and you weighs up to 60 pounds. It could be up to 75 depending upon the problem being enacted. So my grandpa was getting his butt whooped. He was 38 years old at the time, and in life charting, 38 is a major crisis year. I spoke earlier in a video about your age of wisdom comes between 35 and 40. So you see here he is, and he's really trying to reason with himself and with his wife the best he can about the situation he's been put into. So I find that interesting. The next little excerpt from a letter I thought was very interesting. My grandfather was actually recorded to be in this Pepsi commercial. So it says, and it is hard to read. Well, maybe I'm just going to tell you guys. So he's sending a recording of himself to my grandmother, and he says maybe someday it'll be worth something. Just that his voice is preserved is pretty cool. Now, during this time, him and my grandmother are talking about their plan. Where is Graham gonna live? They came from Chicago, and they had kin here in St. Louis. So plan 2 is just break up Chicago and go to St. Louis. And it says neither of us have any real ties in Chicago, and what ties we have set aside from each other are in St. Louis. If Charles Bauer has gone to the Navy by now, Edna no doubt would like to have you at her house, and it wouldn't be tough financially. However, you must decide for yourself whether or not you could take Edna and the 4 kids for a steady diet, especially for a period of months when you would be below par physically, maybe sometimes in the dumps mentally, etc. They're wondering if she's pregnant. So my grandmother and grandpa never really decided to have children, and he goes off to war. And a lot of times when there's high emotion, extra eggs are released. So my grandma got knocked up, and she was 37 at the time, so that's kind of old for a woman, they say. Oh, that's right, I had my last child at 37 too. Alright, so Edna is her little sister, and by the way, Edna looks just like Lauren. So I can't wait to show you a picture. And I have a picture of Edna when she's a child holding a bear cub. So we also see the temperament is the same. And it's just beautiful. What we're seeing is a continuation that goes through in the family lines. There again, Edna being an old hand at this childbirth business, and despite her surface flippancy, might be just the type of cure and companionship that you would need during such a period as that which lies just ahead. Then, too, you would be within almost daily visiting reach of your mom, without risking setting up of complications between her and Jimmy. And two, you would be within at least a weekend visit range of Burl and Alberta. Burl is my grandfather's brother. And despite Burl's ZG fascinism, I am sure they would both be as sincerely concerned about your well-being, especially at a time when you're in a delicate situation as such. So, we get up to November 28th, 1943. In the last paragraph is what I planned on reading. Yes. We're just going to read the whole thing. Just received your letter of last Saturday in which you report your OB's final decision that we are to have a little Mitch. You admit you are a little excited, but if I know you at all, you are more than a little excited, because even I, at 1,000 miles distance away, are more than a little excited at the prospect myself. And by that I don't mean alarmed or even disappointed at the timing. In fact, as you so seriously point out in your letter, the whole thing, including the timing, may be all for the best if the little redhead and his mother both come through okay, and they will. After all, children have been born to women in the backwoods without real medical attention. The women older than you, and both have come through okay. In fact, it's still being done every day, and will continue to be so. Maybe we both have been too much concerned in recent years about our advancing age. And maybe this is just the thing to wake us both up to the fact that we are not so old and decrepit as we thought. Next letter. Okay. Yeah. He's having to do some hard training here. And what actually winds up happening is we get into a little bit of a fight. And it has to do with a place called the Brig. But first, we're also playing with a little brass here. Most firstly and second lieutenants, who hereto have been chiefly 9 days, wondered after being salted down with men who have some action in this war. We have one Louis who had his first feet frozen in the alt. This is too hard to even read, guys. I guess I'm not reading that, huh? Well, back to a letter on December 4th, because this gets so confusing. My grandpa brought up being in trouble for dropping his gun. And in the meantime, what he was saying was that no matter what, he wasn't going to turn to alcohol. Now, my grandmother was a functional alcoholic, so I kind of really just wanted to use that letter as a tag to maybe her crying out and why alcoholism was a natural choice for her. I have a really cool letter here, and this is a letter where my grandmother writes on one side and my grandfather writes on another, kind of like in high school when you pass the letter back and forth. Now, of course, he hasn't gone overseas yet. And it says, "Honey, I got the final word this morning. You really are going to get a junior. I realize there are pros and cons to the entire situation. Who knows, it may be the best time if it was ever to be. If you've had a little shaver before you left, would only have made going twice as hard. Now you have something real to come home to. I'm not dwelling on that shit, but I, and I'm sure you too, only hope that now the little red-headed devil will be perfect physically and mentally." I'd like to mention my mother was not born a redhead, but my grandfather's nickname was Red, and he had auburn hair, and my father is a redhead too, so interesting that he talks about redheads so much. Well, now, for what I said and what he said, as to the you guys don't want to hear about that. This is how she treats her constipation, but she does use magnesium. Told him I lived on the 5th floor. Ooh, I walk up. Yeah, she has to walk up 8 flights of stairs, okay. He said I didn't have to get off it, and it was more or less up to me. If I felt I could manage it, okay. In a way, that surprises me. We will talk about that when I see you. Ask him if I could travel to Texas to visit you. His answer was yes, under the circumstances. Now, just exactly what that means, I don't quite know. Possibly due to the fact I'm not too far along, and also due to the fact I do not feel, don't feel bad really at any time. I do hope it continues without the nausea, for I understand one is quite fortunate not to have that condition. Of course, this is her only child. Then I asked him about fees. He said, "What does your husband do?" I told him. He said, "What did your salary there amount to?" I answered $50 per. That stumped him. So I told him I wanted him to care for me without frills, and that as long as I wanted his care, I was not asking for it for nothing. That may have been a poor way to say it, but I believe he understood. In any event, it would be more than Mrs. M paid, which is $125. Oh, we're talking about for the delivery fees, right? And I, as you, do not feel that unreasonable for a specialist in view of the charge made by the ordering run. In fact, if he puts it too low, you know how some people are, I'll probably feel as this he's not doing right by me. I believe you'll agree the fee, if it is in the above neighborhood, is just as good as considered okay. You know, my grandma and grandpa were so worried about money. They were depression children. Right, and then they have war. What a life, huh? He measured me from the pelvic bone on up towards my chest. Not that far, but in that direction. And he pondered quite a little, I thought, and said, "You're small in the pelvis, but then you're small anyway." So, my next visit to him is December 28th. In the meantime, I'll plan to see you. How about Saturday the evening of the 11th or Sunday the 12th? You should have this by then. Cute, huh? Now, at this point, He's still stateside. My grandmother believes that he'll be coming home and that they'll have a baby together. It's not the way the story turns out. This is the end of 1943.